All right, we are live. Welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Ed Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Prior, I spend a lot of time in this stream answering questions in the chat. Um, a few rules about chat, as always. No personal attacks or insults. That's always a good one to have. But I will answer any questions and deal with questions for as long as I can take it. So I'm autistic, so social situations eventually get to me, and I have to back out. But I also, have to deal with everybody, in the chat. But it looks like everybody's coming in. Let's see. I think Rimmer gets the award for being here first. Yeah, Rimmer, thanks. Welcome. He had a question I'll deal with here in a minute. Let's see who else we got. We got Alex and we have Azo so far. All right. But here's Rimmer's question. We'll start off with this one. This is always a fun topic. For me, is the attitude of Christians towards people that don't believe. So I don't know what the context of the conversation is, but I've experienced this so many times at the end of conversations that I can absolutely feel for Rimmer here. But it's like if you get into this conversation with a theist, and at the end of the conversation, they're just kind of being really big time jerks of it. I had that experience kind of sort of this week. Some guy commented on my video from a week ago about the Magi and how he got bored after a while and didn't really listen to it and all this other stuff. And it's like, I literally, he was basically saying, he didn't really get to what the literary point of the Magi was. And I'm like, I literally tell you that they're just characters driving the narrative against Herod, like within the first 10 minutes. But and then he admits, he didn't listen and all this stuff. And at the end of the conversation, he's like, well, you need to grow up. I'm like, dude, you have the attention span of a 2-year-old and want everything to be entertaining. And I need to be the one that grows up. And you get into conversations like that. But then when Christians come along and they get into it and they do what they did here to Rimmer, it's like, have a blessed day and may all that is put into the world come back. In other words, what they're saying is, you're just spewing bullshit, and if you get bullshit back, that's what you deserve. So so there's that. But yeah, that's that Christian love that they're so famous for, when it comes to people that disagree with them. Yeah, it's kind of an FU in Christianese. Okay, it's like, I don't like you, I don't want you to talk to me. Your opinion I disagree with, so you're an asshole. So I hope you get everything that I think you deserve. Okay, it's a big FU, really was. And I think Rimmer gave the proper reply. It's like, yeah, FU too. I'm done with the conversation. So I've had so many experiences like this, Rimmer, that I lost count in 5 years of running this channel, where people come on, disagree with me, absolutely will attack me in every single personal way that you can possibly think of. And then, oh, by the way, God bless you, and walk out the door. Okay. So yeah, I feel your pain. The thing with a lot of exchanges on the internet is they're very heated. I try to be very more light than heat when it comes to that. Although these days here in Michigan, where it's 0 degrees and negative in the night, maybe a little heat would be more beneficial. But it's one of those things where I've the internet conversations just really don't appeal to me anymore. I used to do forums all the time in the early days of the internet, and same thing would happen there when you got into an exchange with somebody who disagreed with you. It's like, yeah, well, F you, and hope you have a good day. It's like, what? So there's that. Let's see. We got Lisa. Lisa came in. Hi, Lisa. Good to see you. All right. And no hate like Christian love. Yes. Oh, I killed Earl's here. Hey, Earl. Um, um, BS. I know this is not going to probably shock you, but when I was a Pentecostal, there was literally several Pentecostal theologians that would write on this subject, that the day of Pentecost was actually the Christian church's answer to the Tower of Babel. Like the whole the whole issue was, now you can reach anybody with the gospel because you can speak in any language that exists around the world. God is going to overcome basically his own curse because of the Tower of Babel. It would basically be, yes, that it wasn't the greatest idea, and the day of Pentecost overcomes that. And the gift of tongues is what overcomes that. There is literally theology along this line, BS. So, yeah, I'm not trying to. Your question's funny, but as a former Pentecostal who used, I can probably still speak in tongues. I just don't do it. I find it distasteful and silly. But it's like, there is literally theology along this lines, BS, because I've read it. I remember reading several Pentecostal theologians who made this very case that this was a reversing, like the gospel reverses the curse, and the day of Pentecost reverses the Tower of Babel and all the rest of the stuff. And one of the points I used to make in a snarky, sarcastic way, well, what about the whole fig leaves to cover our nudity then? Is nudity okay? Now, what reversed that? and they would be like, well, all of a sudden it becomes a very uncomfortable topic, when you talk about reversing the curse in Christian theology, because there's been several times in history where people have taken that very, very literally. And so, horror of horrors, we're going to treat men and women equally. And the biggest thing that got a lot of those groups in trouble was they stripped down to their skin. They were naked all the time. And part of the other thing was, some of the Pentecostal groups would say, hey, we're going to talk in tongues so we can overcome it. So it is kind of there is a theology of the Tower of Babel was reversed by the day of Pentecost. It is out there. It legit exists. So, yeah, I get it. Some of you atheists out there are asshole. Really, it's an argument over recipes? Shit. It's amazing how that works. Honestly, Alex, they only care about the Old Testament when it backs up their point. Okay. If you're a person that opposes LGBTQ, all the verses in the Old Testament that do that, yeah, you're happy to quote them. Jesus doesn't address the subject of homosexuality at all. Paul does, in very strong terms. So, you're very right. The Old Testament is kind of, if you want to see something that's cherry picked by Christians the most, it's probably the Old Testament. They like to pull quotes out of there. I always like, well, do you wear mixed fabric? Do you eat shellfish? Like the 7-day Adventists take that shit seriously. They actually look at to whether their fabrics are mixed and shit like that. So, so there's that. Yeah, you can ride 2 donkeys. Earl, looking back at it, I didn't really think of it as cringe back when I was a Pentecostal, but now I get your point, because there's nothing more psychologically manipulative than to convince somebody else that they can speak in another language. All they have to do is start babbling, whatever. So there's that aspect of it, but it's like, I get it now. When people come into a Pentecostal church and say that they were cringed out by tongues, I can completely understand. But I saw other behavior that was more cringeworthy, like There was a male pastor that caused several girls that were teenage girls to fall under the power, so to speak. Well, they were all wearing skirts, and the way they fell, he could absolutely see up them, So it was he. There was a lot of cringe-worthy moments like that in the Pentecostal church, where you had the preachers kind of manipulating the quote-unquote opposite sex to positions where were kind of cringe stuff, especially with girls and things like that. That happened a lot. Um, I suppose that's true. That's pretty good theology there, BS. You should become a theologian, BS. I think you could do a really good job of it. Um, you know, so it's like, because the thing about theology is you can make it do anything you want it to do. I speak as a former theologian. So, I was constantly going around in circles trying to come up with a definitive answer, and suddenly realizing that theology is inherently circular. It goes around in a circle and doesn't get anywhere. So. Oh. Yeah. Oh, well, see, here's the thing, Evan. There's always one person in this crowd that's fashionably late, and today it's you. So that's okay. Better late than never. Yeah, Earl, Pentecostal services can be very, very awkward, especially when you look at the human interactions that people are doing. I picked up on it when I was a Pentecostal. It's even more noticeable to me when I'm now not one, of how much it's manipulation of people, and it gets very, very cringe. It does. I mean, it's definitely awkward. Okay. So it's that kind of thing. And I don't go into church for a lot of reasons, and I certainly don't go into a Pentecostal church for that reason. But it's like, so there's that. Oh yeah, I thought American was the original language that everybody came off of. At least that's what I hear these days. Sorry, Earl. Yeah, the omnipresence of God, it's one of the killers for a lot of theology, because you'll sit there, you'll listen to like open theists talk about how God has limits to his power and limits to his knowledge. And then you have to ask the question, well, what about his presence? Is he everywhere all the time? And well, yes and no. It gets, well, there's times when God's presence is really powerful, but he's everywhere. And it's like, yeah, it gets to be a real round and round and round. Yeah. Yeah. The thing about tongues and the mainstream Pentecostal churches is it is kind of an embarrassment to these days. And yet, the Assemblies of God still has as one of its 16 fundamental truths that tongues is the initial physical evidence of being filled with the Spirit. So it's part of the culture. It's part of the doctrine, the culture, and everything else in the Assemblies of God. And a lot of Pentecostal churches do that. I knew I was kind of going to ignite the Pentecostal stuff with my video yesterday, but it's like the tongues thing. I think once you understand what it is, it's a learned behavior. You learn it by watching other people, and there are literally people that will instruct you on how to speak in tongues. And it literally is, I stole my Honda fast. It's like, and different words just said quickly. But yeah, it is an embarrassment to a lot of Pentecostal preachers because it makes them look silly. Okay, now the thing with tongues is it's not a completely Pentecostal Christian phenomenon. I think there's certain sects of Hinduism that also speak in tongues, and a few others. So it's not unique, but at the same time, it's the one thing that keeps the Pentecostal church in that on the other side of the tracks kind of thing, in the poor side of town kind of thing. Because I remember reading a commentary written by somebody in 1920 about Pentecostal churches, and their observation was, yeah, that's for the poor people. Okay. And they've never really gotten over that. And tongues kind of keeps them there. Okay. It kind of keeps them there. You're a natural, BS. Yes. I'm telling you. I guess I am. I've debated with myself about that a lot. I guess my master's degree is in theological studies. And what I did is I read a lot of theologians. Okay. And I read a lot of doctrine. I did take some biblical studies classes, like how to break down the Bible as literature, which is probably what I'm really good at. That's kind of more my specialty. But theology for me was me listening to what other people said about God. And I guess I still engage in it to debunk it. Okay, I guess I understand the cyclical nature of theology, and that's why so former Pentecostal non-denominational, which is basically the same as remembering about being about 10, waiting to speak in tongues. Yes, gross. Yeah, speaking in tongues is so, it's easy to convince something that they're spiritual when you can convince them how to teach them to speak in tongues. Well, I don't know how I do that. It's like, it's a psychological phenomenon. You observe other people speak in tongues and you get trained. Okay, that's what you're supposed to be. So there's an attitude of expectation. And when you're waiting around for this and you're 10 years old and you're convinced of it, it can take a while. But it is kind of gross now, because there's a lot of very intimate conversations that are had at the altar when people are trying to speak in tongues and get filled with the Spirit, and at least in my Pentecostal experience. And so there's a lot of stuff that just, when I look back at it, it's like, man, that's kind of creepy. It's kind of creepy. And you're right, it is kind of gross. We can twist it into as many pretzels we want, including pretzels that are exact inversion of what is very plainly stating. Yeah, I'm amazed. Like when I do the Pentecostal thing, every once in a while I'll get a commenter that says, well, yeah, but that was for the apostles. And my immediate response as a former Pentecostal is, where does it say that in the text? Okay. In fact, I would say Peter says the exact opposite. And, but yeah, theology, you can literally get a theology that says the exact opposite of what the Bible says. Okay. Because theology will go, there's different branches of theology. I know people don't believe this, but there's like biblical theology, where you're just drawing your theology directly from the text as much as possible. You got historical theology, where you look at various theologians throughout the centuries and what they thought about it. You've got systematics, where you take all that and put it together. You got philosophical theology, where you take the theology and put it through the philosophical grinder to see if it gets, there are so many multiple ways to just kind of circle jerk this and get what you want. You're absolutely correct, though. Are you going to burn? I don't go into churches because of trauma, but but I get your point. Yeah. Yeah, he's only in churches. Let's see. Yeah, bacon. I'm not a rabbit. Boy, that was so embarrassing. There's some funny thing about that, BS. When put on, the thing that puts subtitles on, where it generates them automatically based on what you're saying. I have lost track of the number of times that YouTube has translated Rabyd Atheist into Rabbit Atheist every time. And I know that they sound so similar that the AI just probably doesn't get it, but it's like the subtitle system will do that to me too. Okay, so thanks for not making me a rabbit, though. Yeah, so it's kind of one of those things where I've had it you know, it's where people are like, oh, I thought you were the Rabyd, atheist. And so like, read the title, you know, I don't know. But thanks a lot, BS. I appreciate that. Oh, oh, yeah, yeah. And see, the thing is, Rimmer, every once in a while, the church does something that I would consider artistically brilliant. Okay, I like old cathedrals for how they look. I mean, the old Gothic architecture is great. It's great until you realize how many people died and how much money was spent on it that could have been going to helping the poor at the time, you know, and they built this big, you know, I mean, the argument is, well, they built something big and grand together that everybody can enjoy, but it's like, yeah, I think some people would have rather had food and not starved to death at age 30 instead, you know, and one of the things is a lot of those old big cathedrals in Europe, yeah, there's a little bit of people buried at the bottom of them, you know, that were helping build them. So, so there's that. That's true. You know, Michael, here's the thing. If I actually knew German, it would be very hard to speak in tongues in German in Michigan because there's so many German speakers here. And there's a lot of former German immigrant settlers, descendants thereof. And so people would recognize it as German instead of tongues. So I'm not sure I could get away with it. Maybe some other places in the country, but not here. So all the behaviors meme. Yeah, it's probably true. You live for sacrilege? That's good. Oh yeah, you know, the thing is, with the snake handling thing, my Pentecostal denomination basically took a stand against it, and what they said was that's not deliberately picking up snakes, but it's like Paul when he reaches in and gets bit by a snake that he thinks is a stick, and he doesn't die from them. That's what that's about. Of course, once you realize that's all part of the longer ending of Mark that was probably added, it kind of gets really sillier then too. Oh, secular theology. Okay, I don't get me wrong. I've dropped the term like you know subjective morality. I don't call it that anymore. I've started calling it secular morality because it gets it away from that touchy feely feeling. But yeah, I can see secular theology where people as secularists look at theology from a standpoint of historical impact. I could see that because certain theologies have definitely guided certain people groups to do historical things in history. My country is a great example of that. Uh, Between divine providence and manifest destiny, all by God, those have been kind of a couple ones that have really done some really wonderful things, wonderful in quotes, and with a lot of sarcasm. So, um, I think by nature of the time, probably so. Um, I mean, I'm trying to think of how you don't have any other communicative medium. Most people don't know how to read and write. So personal testimony, word of mouth, all of that stuff was very much part of the early church. And they did write things down, but there's a reason why the people who became the leaders of the church became the leaders, and it's because they were probably educated and they knew how to take advantage of this. So, but yeah, I can see why testimony was valued by them, but I also understand of how that's how so many things back then went wrong. Because you could literally get somebody hung or killed for just a couple of people saying they did something, and that's not good evidence. Okay, um, and so I think it was very much personal. People had these personal experiences, and I got to redo my video on why personal experience doesn't prove shit, even to yourself, because you're kind of counting on your ability to interpret it with absolute infallibility, and that's not necessarily the case. But I think it was very much part of the early church, and that's how it spread so quickly. So, all right. You want a rabid atheist now? Well, I'm sure there's one out there. I'm the Rabyd Atheist with a Y. So, but there's that. Hey, Travis, welcome. This is Rapid Fire, and I just answer questions in the chat. So if you have them, my enunciation, do I? Yeah, I suppose, but it's hard. I just say it, rabid. There's no T in it. I don't know why it gets the T in there. Well, that's not very nice. Yeah. Yeah, I get that every time somebody watches Old Yeller here too. Oh, you killed that dog. That's nice. Yeah, I mean, my last church is a Gothic architecture design church that was built in, I want to say 1880 something, 1890 something. So it has this tall 4-story tall steeple. It had the turrets on the corner with all the Gothic scroll work, and it's made out of pine, but it was beautiful, beautiful building. If I were to have my druthers on how it'd be used, I would hope someday the congregation would stop using it as a church and they would make it into a museum of the area, because the area does have some rich history, natural and actual history that's local, that's pretty interesting. And it would be a historical building, housing historical archives, and I could live with that. So, how do I explain something like that? I would ask her to prove it's a language. Okay. And not just something babbling on, and something. I explain it very, very simply in the fact that she just was probably copying what somebody else said. I mean, the more I listen to tongues, it's kind of, if you listen to it for a while, and I had a great chance to listen to a lot of it, I spent a lot of time realizing how repetitive it was. And languages usually aren't repetitive like that. Okay, so there it uh, it begins to you begin to realize that people are just kind of copying sounds, and they're not actually speaking languages. But the biggest thing is, what language is it? Is a good question. And do you know? And the way Pentecostals get past that is like, I uh, they get past by the tongues of men and angels, and it's the angel thing. Well, that's the language of angels, and we don't understand it. So they're going to punt. Understand this, Alex. They'll find a theological way around what your question, because that's the nature of theology. It's slippery, and they will find a way. So that's kind of an issue where you have to ask them and corner them, what do you mean by language? Because I don't think that people realize that tongues isn't always a language, because, there's a lot of linguists have gone into Pentecostal services and literally come out and said that none of it was language. And so that they would recognize. So there's that. So I would ask her to prove that it was a foreign language of some sort. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that as good use for churches. There's a church here in town that's been converted into a theater, and I think that's another good use for old church buildings. Someday I hope to see more of that, where their church becomes a theater. So, let's see. Yeah, well, is she speaking a language is the question, or is she just babbling? Oh my gosh. I should find like a bunny rabbit and hold it for one of my thumbnails, and you guys would see how ridiculously large I am compared to a rabbit. So there's that. Um, I guess I have a different view on it, Rimmer. What I see when you take like Paul's authentic writings and then the other fake ones that are written later, where it kind of institutionalizes the church. I think Paul was part of that. We're all going to die and go to be with Jesus in the next 40 years. Okay. And so he has a very apocalyptic end of the world, resurrection's coming tomorrow viewpoint. And then all of a sudden, after 40 years, it doesn't happen. And so then we get these other 6 letters supposedly written by Paul that institutionalize the church and kind of say, well, we're waiting for the second coming of Christ still. He wasn't really specific. This is what I'm talking about when I say theology is slippery. When circumstances change, you can flip it real quick and do something different. So there's that aspect. So I don't know. It's to me, I think the institutionalization came and then they wrote some letters and stuff, and I think that's why as it First or Second Peter says, God is not slack, as some people count slack, because a day with God is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day. And so you already see the excusegetics about why Jesus didn't come back within 40 years, like he said he would. Okay. And so when you read it that way, a lot more makes sense, that these people were kind of backpedaling off the Christian claims at the time. So sorry for the coughing, but my sinus infection still seems to be there, and it now lodges in my throat. So that's why I sound froggy. No, just no. I don't like rabbits. So no, no, I don't think so. Prove he was a real person. That would be a good start for me. Carpenter Gothic. Yeah. I do a deconstruction live stream on Thursday now, and it was actually very popular. I would love to do video callers, but I'm a one man show, and I've learned that there's limits to what I can do as a one man show. So maybe someday I would set something up with somebody else where there would be 2 of us, like they do on some of the other shows. But that way, you know, I could do something like that. And this is a StreamYard product, so I can let people in if I want to. I just during the midweek, I just don't have time for it because I'm going to be out of here in probably an hour, maybe less, because I have to go to work later. So I work at night. So I do these 2 shorter streams in the midweek to kind of handle stuff like that. But this is a question and answer one, and then the other one's a deconversion one where guys, that was the best stream of last week. I had almost 40 people here at once at one point, and a lot of people watched it later. But a lot of people want support for deconversion. I think definitely the format of you have to be a subscriber, and it's a theist-free zone, so theists aren't allowed to preach or quote their Bible verses like Jenna's here. You get away with that today. On Thursday, you wouldn't get away with it. I'd have you blocked. Okay. Verses of scripture don't mean much to an atheist, by the way. You're not doing anything there. So, yeah, the buildings could find some other use. They're great theaters. I find that you can really convert almost any church into a theater of some sort, plays, productions, movie theater, whatever. And Ticketmaster to hell first. Okay. We can come up with a doctrinal statement for that Star Child where they're not allowed to use Ticketmaster because they're of the devil. Yeah, see, there's the other thing. People do this in reverse. Storefront churches are still a thing. I saw so many of them in Houston. So, yeah, I know that. I've read it and I've preached from it many, many times, and I'm going to tell you it's bullshit. Okay, it's BS. The writer of Hebrews makes up a lot of shit. Okay, and we don't even know who he was or she was. Could be a girl. That's why it's probably anonymous. Yeah, it really is. It really is kind of fun with theology because you can make it do anything you want, and once you're out of it, you kind of realize that, and you just kind of disappear with it. So, hey, Tux, good to see you. Welcome. I have a funny story from a couple days ago at work. I was wearing my one shorts. I wear shorts to work even when it's cold because I'm in a place where I run around the store, and by the end of the night, no matter what the weather is, I'm sweating. And to manage my heat level, being hypersensitive to heat, I wear shorts all the time still. And I'm bebopping around, and they ripped right up the one side. And so I had to buy an actual pair of long jeans because we don't have jean shorts in the store right now this time of year. So that was a rabbit cheek tack. That might be interesting, but I don't like rabbits. So yeah, it's absolutely true. Bible scholars will admit to you that they don't know who wrote Hebrews. Okay, and it's crap. Okay, I preach from it. I know it. Why is it you theists think that I don't know what you know? Is it because I don't believe it? Because I don't believe it, I must not know it. That's just really poor logic. People can know what you believe and reject it. Why is that so hard to understand? That people can know what you believe and reject it. Okay, because it's not adequate. Yeah, I get what you're saying, but Paul was an apocalyptic preacher when you listen to him. He's like going full bore, we're going to all die in 40 years. And that's very uncharacteristic later on with the institutionalized. That's why we know that those letters, like when I did my master's thesis on First Timothy, I dismissed Paul as a writer, but I assumed it for the theology. But I immediately realized that saying Paul was the author of that book was extremely problematic because of him institutionalizing the church, which he seemed to have no desire to do in his other letters. So, rabbit tramp stamp. Oh, this is going to be a joke for a while, isn't it? Okay. I love you people. The chaos is awesome. Rabbit's revenge. Yeah, okay. It's difficult. Yeah, I drove home last night. It was negative 15 this morning, Fahrenheit, for those of you in Europe and elsewhere. Not Celsius, negative 15 Fahrenheit. And so it was cold. And then today, like right now, it's -2. So I'm trying to stay warm. I'm in my warm apartment, but the furnace has definitely been running a lot more than normal. So than normally it does in the winter. The devil doesn't exist. Prove the devil exists. I'll wait. It would be Hebrews. Yeah, it probably would have been. The other thing I've always heard is that the name Hebrews is proof that men should brew the coffee because Hebrews, not Shebrews. Yes, the bad dad jokes come out with that one. What's the point? When you believe in magic, Anne Marie, and you believe that the Bible has magical powers, like if you quote verses at people, they will change because of its magical powers of the quotations, you do this sort of thing. And they feel like they're doing evangelism. They're doing what Jesus told them to do, which is go into the world and preach the gospel. The problem is most people can't give me a definitive answer on what the gospel actually is. Okay. And, but I have always asked that question because I get trolls all the time. I've got them over the last 5 years, and I always have to ask the question, what motivates them? But I'm like, if you really genuinely believe that you have the truth and everybody else is wrong, and you don't have to subject that to the same kind of scrutiny as anything else, yeah, sure, you're going to show up. But I have literally talked blue in the face about quoting scripture at me. I know the scriptures and I reject them. Okay. I reject them. I patently reject them. And yet people will still quote Bible verses at me. Like, and the reason is they believe it has a magical power, because the word of God will not go out void. And, how can, hearing comes by the word of God, and the word of God has transferred for, it can transform a person just by hearing it. They believe in this magical thing where, the scripture is going to have this magical effect on you. And if they just get out there and say Jesus is Lord, somehow that makes it true. Okay. But you have to think of the mentality. If you're in church and you hear God is good all the time, and all the time God is good, and you take that as truth, then you think that just by saying it, it makes it so. And that's why they do it. They genuinely believe that they can get on here, quote scripture, say their normal stuff, and it'll change people. They believe this. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of like that, I guess. Yes, twice. Um, I remember once I was preaching in my last church, and the pants I was wearing were a little tight because my other ones I had forgotten to wash. And I remember getting up, and as I got up to preach my message, they ripped right down the back middle. And so I literally, normally I'm a little bit more animated when I preach, but not that day. And then I sat back down and I got whispered over my worship. I think my pants ripped. You're going to have to be the one that kind of runs things from now on. So there's that. So yeah, but and then there was another time, I don't remember that one as bad because it was like at the end of a church day that it ripped, and I just went over to the parsonage and changed them, and it was no big deal. But yeah. So I've had that happen a couple of times. So it's embarrassing, but if you're smart, you don't draw attention to it. You just go with it. So you drew your rabbit tattoo on your right hip yourself. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, there is a case to be there, but I don't know. I compare the authentic writings of Paul versus his forgeries, and it's the forgeries that institutionalize the church. The authentic ones don't seem to do that. So you got it, huh? It's Hebrews. That's why men are supposed to make the coffee. So what if there was never a Paul? There would be no Christianity. I don't think so. I mean, I'm not diminishing Rimmer's point about the fact that I think Paul is probably more responsible for creating Christianity because he moved it from a Jewish sect to a Gentile movement of people. And that was the significant action of Paul. Paul turned it into something that was more than Jerusalem. Okay. He made it into a worldwide movement. He's probably the single person most responsible for that. Not bad for a half mad mystic, so there's that. Yeah. I mean, there's a valid point. If the devil does exist. So, yeah, I mean, I've come to find that. And we're also really literal about it too. If you want a literalist Bible interpretation, go to an atheist. They will give it to you every time. So, so yeah, yep, that's happened before. God parted the Brown Sea. All right. Yep, that's a real story, true story. Yeah, ripping your pants is kind of an occupational hazard, especially if you have to move in them a lot. Like for me at work, I have to have full range of movement because I have to, when I'm modding shelves, I have to do the bottom shelves. And so I literally sit on the floor sometimes in order to do that because I'm so tall. And so, yeah, if you don't have pants that give good range of movement or you somehow get them snagged in themselves, they can rip. So, yeah, I've had that happen a couple times at work too. So, I am well aware. And yes, follow the white rabbit. It's probably the only rabbit I like. Uh, is the one in Alice in Wonderland. I think that one's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, if you want to say he institutionalized doctrine, yeah, I'll go along with that. Did he institutionalize the church in creating leadership? It's sketchy. What he did do is make it an outside Jerusalem movement. Like he took it to the Gentiles, as he puts it, in his letters, and that kind of changed the way Christianity was viewed. But if that hadn't happened, it would be remembered as a sect of Judaism that worshiped this guy. But it wouldn't be all over the world like it is today. We'd be something else. We'd be there Islamic because then the medieval church wouldn't have given a damn about Islam. It wouldn't have been there to do so. But there would probably have been something else. Um, in the ministry, I probably found that fairly true in the Pentecostal church fairly early on. Me and my friend, the guy I used to work for in my first church when I was a Christian education pastor, and he was the senior, we kind of had that discussion pretty early. But as a pure human agenda, that was probably later when I deconverted and no longer was a Christian. I was still in the pulpit for the next 3 years. And I suddenly, during that 3 years, you kind of have this mind opening experience about how human this institution is. I did so many secular business type things in the church when I was doing my 20 years ministry, like having a mission and vision statement. What's your, doing your budgeting and budgeting goals. And you start to realize that there's a lot of practical stuff like that. And the best pastors are the people who understand that and try to promote that. That's becomes their thing. If you look at the mega church pastors, they understand the human agenda of a church and they find subtle, very spiritualized ways to push that human agenda. And so I kind of saw the human agenda early on because we noticed it with our own denomination, me and my friend, when we were working together back when I was still a believer. But we noticed how the money worked inside the denomination, like in the Michigan district. These events, like children's camp and stuff like that, were funding people's salaries. Okay. So it was kind of like, but yeah, there's that aspect of it. So yeah, I don't know. It took me a while. Once I got out of it, it was easier to see, but I think most pastors realize there's a human side to it. No, we're not going to do that. I don't know. Honestly, I have no idea because I don't know what was on Paul's brain. I do think, you know, I mean, the Monty Python season with the Life of Brian, the scene where you have all these, you know, claimed messiahs, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Messiah. That's not complete parody, okay, of the times. So there's that aspect of it. So I wonder sometimes if people really were see because the Paul seems one thing very sincere. Okay, he's a sincere believer, which makes him even more dangerous, in my opinion now. But it's like I don't know if he felt that it was going to last past his lifetime. The way he talks, so is the way. So it's hard to say how that would have panned out. But I do know one thing: if Paul hadn't existed at all, it might have died in Jerusalem. It might not have gotten very far. So he's the one who made it bigger. When you look at his authentic letters, that's him writing to churches he established, and it's that action alone that kept the church moving forward into what it is today. So yeah, there have been a shit ton of messianic cults, and it's because of, see, the whole messianic theology is what started all that, and everybody suddenly starts claiming to be all that. But it did come out of the exile period, which is a historical kind of a verifiable event. The later parts of the history of the Bible are actually kind of verified a little bit. The farther back you get, the more it becomes more and more myth. And so that's kind of tells us when it was written. They wrote it at a time where they knew some of the events that were closest to them in time, but the farther back they get, the more mythological it gets. So, but that whole messianic theology comes out of that period where they're looking for a deliverer, a redeemer, or somebody to take them to victory over their political enemies. There's a reason why the Gospels work, because they are definitely trying to fill that messianic narrative, and that's the problem. So I don't know. There's just a lot of messianic figures. Life of Brian does this really well, the parody really well. But the problem is there's a lot of, it's funny because it's true, is very much a part of that scene. So, hey, Skeptically, good to see you. Yes. Because if you look at Iron Age religion, it very much is so connected with the leader. It's one of the things that I noted when I was still a believer was how much there's a connection between these different messianic figures and what the agenda that they had. I had this discussion this week, about, the Herodians, and this guy he's a Christian, didn't realize that the Herodians were people who thought that Herod the Great was the Messiah. But I knew that back in Bible college because that's what was taught. Yeah. And so and he was, well, that's the stupidest idea. It's an idea propagated by Bible colleges. Okay. Because the whole point of Matthew sometimes is that Herod wasn't the Messiah that he said he was, and instead it was Jesus. And so they had to get past that narrative. And so they were lousy with these messianic leaders who thought they were fulfilling all that. Yeah. Yeah. They're looking for a new object of worship when they don't have access to the temple. Yes. And Gentile believers, I can see how that message would appeal to them because you don't need the temple anymore. It's why the writer of Hebrews goes on and on, because we just had somebody quote Hebrews. It's a propaganda move to say you don't really need the physical temple anymore. You can have the temple whose builder and maker is God. Okay, so there's this theological shift in Hebrews, moving away from the temple and all that jazz and into a more spiritualizing of it, theology being slippery as it is. Yes, he's a very naughty boy, as emphasized in that scene. So I don't know. I don't believe I have. So Iron Louse is preaching the apostle. Okay. Yeah, I'm a grandpa now, so grandpa jokes are a thing too, and they're worse than dad jokes. So, yep, he did, and that's the thing. But I remember watching Paula G a video. He has a doctor. Oh man, I can't remember her name, but she was instrumental in discovering some of the archaeological discoveries around Herod. And the fact that Herod believed that he was the Messiah is pretty clear in some of the archaeological discoveries that he had. So he did have Herod the Great had a big head about himself. So when they were discovering some of the things. Like Herod very rarely builds something to himself, but what he does build to himself is significant because it definitely points to him being like the spiritual leader of the Israelite people. And so there was definitely some evidence that Herod did believe that he was a messianic figure himself. And a whole bunch of other people, the Herodians, they became called, believe that as well. And so when Matthew writes, we're going to get into this coming week with questionable witnesses when I talk about the slaughter of the innocents and its relationship to Matthew and the life of Christ. It's like there's this idea that Herod propagated that he was the Messiah, and Matthew is definitely going hardcore against that because he wants to prove Jesus is the Messiah. So it's definitely a thing, and it's been a thing in biblical studies. And I was very surprised, well, I shouldn't be surprised, that a Christian didn't know who the Herodians were and what they taught. Okay, and we're just finding more and more evidence for it. Yeah, it's a really good video. I wish for the life of me I could remember it. But it was like, it demonstrated that archaeologically speaking, Herod the Great definitely thought he was the Messiah in a more deliver us from our enemies case, because he was a true king of Israel. He bowed his knee to the Romans, but the Romans didn't directly rule his territories. He just paid them homage. And so from his perspective, he was a king of Israel who rebuilt the temple, who did a bunch of stuff. Why wouldn't you consider him the Messiah? Okay. And then we now, thanks to Apologia, and then the one doctor that's been doing the work, we have some archaeological evidence of that. But that's always been, I'm really surprised that Christians don't know that. Okay. But then again, I'm not. So do you think that Christians need to be under somebody because they think they are really bad people and need a ruler? Yes. Let me give you a pastor's point of view, a former pastor's point of view. Everybody who came in my church always wanted to talk about my authority, what authority I possessed. Okay. In the Assemblies of God, I had probably absolute authority in a church over the spiritual life of the church. Now, there were authorities over me, like the Bible is my authority. The denominational authorities had some authority over their preachers as far as credentialing and all that stuff. But the people in the pew always were looking for somebody to give them what they needed to do. There's definitely a personality thing and a believer of submission to authority. I don't think that that's a far-fetched notion, Brooklyn. I don't. I do not think that is far-fetched at all, because when you tell people that they're sinners and they can't do anything right and they need somebody like God to tell them what to do, and then you have this person over here who's representative of God on earth, the pastor, the priest, or whatever, you can go to that person to hear from God for you and tell you what to do. Yes. And that is the base of authoritarianism, is needing a leader to tell you what to do. Okay. That somebody else has to tell you. So I would say, yes, that's not a far-fetched notion. I would probably say that that's pretty close to the truth. Most of the people in my Pentecostal churches were looking for a spiritual authority person to follow. That's why they hop from church to church, and they never seemed to realize that the real authority was them, but they didn't want to say that because then that sounds egotistical. But when you preach forever that people are sinners and they can't do anything right, yeah, that sets a really good precedent for turning to God to tell you what to do, turning to the spiritual leaders to tell you what to do. Okay. And yeah, it's not a far-fetched notion. So, yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you for looking that up for me, Rimmer. But yeah, Jody Magnus, she's the one. And if you watch that video, she's the one that talks about the archaeological discoveries, kind of confirming that Herod the Great and the Herodians really believed that he was the Messiah, and that he had fulfilled the messianic prophecies. And now Israel was getting away from that by following, and it was the basis for a lot of the children of him and the grandchildren of him thinking that they were also messianic figures as well. So yeah, but that was a great video. It's a good video if you want to delve into the whole Herod the Great thought he was the Messiah motif. That's definitely one there. Not much yet, Jason, although I'm probably going to close out here in 10-15 minutes, so because I got to get ready for work. But so, hey, damn network. Glad you're listening. But yeah, I'm fielding questions from the chats, and it's all I really place the welfare of my stream in the hands of the people in the chat, and I often question my wisdom in that decision. So with some of the people that come here, I love them all. Yeah, the fight now is real. Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised nobody's asked. I love you, Earl. I do. But I'm very dependent on all of you to ask questions. It makes me feel vulnerable. So you know how it is. They're all agents of chaos. There's some truth to that. I'll grant that. Okay. No. You can keep coming. I love y'all. It's I'm surprised nobody's asked about the inauguration of Trump yesterday. I think that was probably the most significant event in American history so far, at least according to Trump. So, but yeah, I think I'll probably end up fielding a lot of that, probably deconversion hangout, because there's a lot of things in what he's done so far that affect some people. But it was mostly an immigration day that day, and well, yeah, you just got to give me something to have a take about. My take on it. Here we go again. Okay. You wore black like you do every day. Refuse to watch. Okay. I feel you. I feel you. That. My problem, as always, with Trump is he doesn't seem to realize that the executive branch of the government has limits. Okay, he thinks he can do it. Like, I'm just going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. I'm just going to do it. It's like, don't you think we should consult, like, I don't know, the Mexicans about that, or the international community about that? It's like, it's this. His executive orders read like, I don't understand that there are limits to the power of the president. He doesn't understand it. He's not a CEO of the nation. Annex Greenland. There's just, when you see him do stuff like that, it's like, Republicans, I love you to death, but how do you put up with that nonsense? Yeah, it's like, it really is like, what the fuck? It really is. And I'm looking at it, and I'm listening. I have all the executive orders. I've been reading the first day's executive orders, and probably the most significant ones that actually are real public policy things to me is like the no birthright citizenship to people born here if their parents aren't like documented aliens or legal citizens. So it's like, so what category does that child now fall in? Are they uncitizen of anything? Does anybody acknowledge them as a citizen of their country? That puts that child in a real awkward place just to get back at the parents. He did a clear executive order saying there are only two genders, male and female. So that's going to be fucked. Yeah, it's, gosh, what are some of the other ones? I remember reading some of them that just, the one I found alarming, that the White House staff doesn't have to go through normal security procedures to have top secret security clearance. I thought this was about safety, security of the country. He's assuming that his administration is all above board. So, Yeah, he definitely made that claim that God saved his life. People claim that too. I think it was just really lousy aim by a kid who didn't really know what he was doing. So, um, yeah, and it's a touchy subject for a lot of people, Earl, because this is one that's really a public policy issue. And it's one of the few things. The problem is, I don't think the president has the authority to do what he's doing. He doesn't have the right to, the presidential office doesn't have the right to decide who a citizen is. That's the product of the legislative branch. And he's trying to circumvent that. That's where the legal challenges are going to be, because I think the 14th Amendment really does assume birthright citizen. If you're born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen, full stop. Okay. And it doesn't matter. So uh, I, I'm going to agree with you. He's not stupid. He's bombastic and he is silly. Okay. And he does a lot of things to appease the crowds. And he doesn't get on Twitter anymore to make these stupid statements. He just does them right across the bully pulpit. But yeah. Uh, yeah, there's that aspect of it. But I, like I said, I don't consider that he's stupid. Okay, he's a very smart self promoter, and he's very smart. He's, despite his claims to the contrary that he's not a politician, he's a very brilliant one. Okay, so so there's that aspect of it. I don't know. No, it doesn't. In fact, we yeah, Earl points it out that we can score really hard on psychopath evaluations. We get that, okay, because our neurology is different. Yeah, he. This is kind of the thing. There are some of these executive orders that are just challenging the Constitution itself, and I think he's going to lose there. It's like I said, he doesn't. He, I feel like he's pushing the boundaries again to see how far he can go. But a lot of people seem to forget that he didn't get a lot of what he wanted in his first 2 years when he had Republican control of Congress last time either, because the Republicans turned on him. Okay, so I'm feeling like in 6 months the Republicans, oh my God, what did we just do to ourselves again? Um, you know, but I don't think he. Yeah, agreed. Stupid people don't become president twice. He has a very political savvy mind. He's not dumb. What he is kind of, it's like, what are you doing? Okay. And okay, so what's the point of all this? Well, let's see how far I can push the boundaries. So I don't, I'm an atheist. You're overgeneralizing atheist, Joe. And I thought I know that somebody removed your comments earlier from one of my posts. So I'm wondering whether I should just ban you outright. Okay, because you never say anything constructive and you never do anything that's a constructive conversation. So I'll see. Let's see what your next comment is. So, okay. Would you take it as a badge of honor? Probably. So maybe I won't. Now I can play this game too. So, but then you can run around and say you got banned by the Rabyd Atheist himself. Oh, somebody already beat me to it. Okay, good. But yeah, yeah. I mean, you know. Well, see, the thing is though, with a psychopath, is psychopaths aren't necessarily stupid either. See, I think there's different types of intelligence. Okay, and I think when it comes to how people work, Trump is an ignoramus in some respects. He doesn't, well, maybe I should rephrase that. I feel like he's a child who has never been told no in his life. Uh, yeah, and yeah, you're an atheist and you don't believe in 70 sexes either. Yeah, I don't. But Joe Friday has kind of been going around to a lot of channels trying to get banned. I think he takes this as a badge of honor. So ban him and then he can have his badge of honor. It's a really stupid badge of honor to have, but there you go. But yeah, I mean, he gets elected. I think he has a way of propagandizing himself that's really good. He's smart about that. He knows as a businessman how to push brand recognition. He's definitely good at that. Um, so there's different types of intelligence, and he's genius level IQ in some and ignorant in the other. I think he's really ignorant when it comes to how the government works. He thinks he was a CEO of a company and he comes into the United States and he thinks he's the CEO of the United States, and it's not the way it works. So, but that's the end of it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's probably what most people who look at gender think about it these days. At least, I don't know, from my perspective, I can see it. I mean, this discussion needs to take place because when I was in school, it was like there's biological gender when I was at Ferris here, and then there's gender roles and societal expectations, and like these 4 or 5 concentric circles that cross over each other. So, so there's that. But yes, but this is another conflation of atheism with so many other things, and it's not necessarily true. See you, Wolf. Have a good one. I got to go here in about 5 minutes myself. So, yeah, it's hard because when I see some of these executive orders, I'm like, it's pushing the boundaries. He's trying to see like the renaming the Gulf of Mexico, and the Mount McKinley thing was kind of controversial when it happened. So, yeah, he's dangerous. He is dangerous. I mean, and he's now has power, but we'll see. I mean, I don't like the presidential powers in general. We wouldn't care who the president was if we hadn't given him so much damn power in the first place. So that would be a good stream. We could talk about that. We can set something up. Email me if I get to my email in the next couple of days, or better yet, message me on Facebook. But yeah, I think I'm going to call it a night before this gets really controversial because there's a lot of different opinions about Trump in this room. So we'll see what happens. But I got to run for a lot of reasons, but I got to get ready for work. But this has been a fun stream. It's been a good one. A lot of good talk about theists and what they do in Pentecostalism. So we'll keep this one out there. So, but that's kind of it for me tonight. Thank you very much for coming out. Hit all the buttons, do all the things, like the video on the way out, get it noticed. The channel is starting to recover and come back to life a little bit. So thanks very much for some of the attention. So thank you very much for that. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around and then it's over. So you want to make sure that you do all the things you do for yourself and the people you love and care for, and to make this a better world. You'll be happier if you do. And don't waste them on the trappings of religion and faith. That's a dead end. And as always, thanks for stopping by, everybody. And I will catch you next time.